So when people have questions, got it. So you're going to be the person running. So when someone raises their hand, Jim should wait until. I'm sure you guys will figure it out. Oh, my pleasure. Thanks, Jim.
I noticed that people get parched when they're in front of.
Yeah, it's the nerves. How's it gone so far? Good. Shouldn't you sit in the middle? Are you in the middle?
I don't know who's in
Yeah,
the
you're in the middle.
Good.
You're okay. Is that okay?
I'm cool.
Doug, you're on the end.
Okay.
Just get your glasses.
A rose between two thorns.
Wait, or what's that thing with Hillary? The two ferns between two ferns. Did you see that?
I have not.
Oh, okay. You got to go online and look at Zach Galifianakis and Hillary Clinton.
Good afternoon. If I could start having your attention up here, we're going to go ahead and get started with the rest of the program with our panel discussion. Feel free to continue to eat. There's still some food and some drinks out there, but we want to maximize the time that we have with our foundation leaders here so that we get to your good questions.
I'll see if I can.
So, I know a few new people joined us just for this lunch panel, so I'm going to introduce myself again. I'm Jim White. I'm the Executive Director of the Nonprofit Association of Oregon. Welcome all of you here to Eagle Crest, to Redmond, Oregon, for this High Desert Conference. We're very fortunate today to have some of our esteemed foundation leaders here to give us a view of what their foundations are doing, what they see are the issues and opportunities and challenges in our communities, and particularly through the work that nonprofits do that they engage with. And then we're going to have, I think, some good Q&A. I know that there's been some questions already formulating in some folks' mind. We will have a microphone out there to go around, and because we are taping this, because we want to make this available to as many people across Oregon as we can, we'll be putting it up through our YouTube channel live, not live, but taped, so that people can view it later and hear what our foundation colleagues are saying, and then also your good questions. So you're representing the whole state here as part of this initiative. So get some good questions in your heads. So I'm going to take a moment to introduce our esteemed panel, and then I'm going to ask them to go ahead and say a few words about their foundation, what they're currently working on, what they're doing, and how their work is affecting Oregon communities. So I'm going to start right here with Max Williams as the CEO and president of the Oregon Community Foundation. He's been in that job now for almost 5 years. Has an esteemed past in public service before, the head of prisons for Oregon, right? And a former legislator from right here in Bend, right?
No, Tigard.
Oh, Tigard, from Tigard, okay. So East Washington County. Ann Kubish is the CEO and president, is it both?
Yes.
CEO and president of the Ford Family Foundation. She's now been in her position for
3.5 years.
3.5 years, and is a relative newcomer here to Oregon, coming from the Aspen Institute for many years, and then before that, an international career working all around the world helping communities develop. And then Doug Stamm has been with the Meyer Memorial Trust for 14 years?
Almost 15.
Almost 15 years. Has led Meyer through some really interesting transitions most recently. I know he's excited about talking to you all about that, and has formerly worked in the private sector with Nike, and has a lot for us to hear and understand today. Doug's a little under the weather, so we're going to be gentle on him. But
Don't
so
be gentle.
okay, well, don't be gentle. So.
Just be nice.
Max, I'll ask you to go ahead and give us some first thoughts.
Great. Well, first let me say it's a pleasure really to be here and to have a chance to talk to all of you. And I know from my perspective, and I think that of my colleagues, that while we'll do a little talking in response to Jim's questions, we're always more interested in responding and hearing what it is that you have an interest in. So we hope we get a chance to really hear from you and your questions. I also just want to acknowledge that even though I represented East Washington County in the legislature, I'm actually from Central Oregon. I was born and raised in Bend, graduated from Bend Senior High, and I love every excuse I can get to be on this side of the mountains, particularly on a day like today. All right.
They call that pandering to the crowd.
Top that, Doug. No. Yeah. Of course, I was in high school when Doug was probably playing football for Stanford. So, the reality is, let me just share. Sorry, we go way back. Let me just say that OCF, many of you know the Oregon Community Foundation. We are different than my two colleagues here in that we really are community philanthropy made up of thousands of individual donors who created funds at the Oregon Community Foundation over the last 44 years. So we have a variety of donors all over the state with a statewide network of both donors and volunteers and our leadership council members that are helping us try to connect philanthropy to community. Our assets right now are about $1.6 billion, and last year we granted out about $90 million to nonprofit organizations and about $10 million in scholarship resources to students all over the state. And we have our basic approach that we're working on right now is really trying to use the dollars that the OCF board has direct control over to really address the opportunity gap. And I know that we've been working on this conversation with a lot of our leadership councils as well, and maybe some of you a year or two ago started to read or read the Robert Putnam book called Our Kids, the American Dream in Crisis. But that frame of the opportunity gap is a lot about how we're trying to actually focus the discretionary resources of the foundation and the work we do. We recognize kind of under our own theory of change that most of those solutions are best actually done at the community level, so we have a broad-based open community grant program. I kind of typically refer to that as sort of OCF's front door. And that's how we end up learning as much as we do about nonprofits, many of the ones that you all are representing here today. That does two things for us. It gives us an understanding about what actually the needs are in community and how that's happening and what you're doing and prioritizing to try to address those needs in your community. Secondly, it informs us a lot about what your organizations do that we're then able to share and connect with the donors that we have who rely on OCF staff sometimes to help them figure out how best to leverage and deploy their philanthropic resources through their donor advised funds. So that's sort of the model that we use in trying to use the resources of the foundation to get that connection. We do have an office in Central Oregon that serves both Central and Eastern Oregon. We have an office in Medford, an office in Coos Bay, in Eugene, in Salem, and then our main office in Portland. And we have staff in all those offices. And it's one of the important ways working with our leadership councils, our volunteer network, that we stay and try to stay really connected to the community all over the state. So I can talk more, but I'm going to pause and let Ann take it next.
Thanks, Max. Hello, everybody. It's really a pleasure to be here. I've been in Oregon now for 3.5 years, and I love it now when I can walk into a room and see familiar faces. And so it's really nice to walk in not to a room of strangers, but to a room of friends. So it's a pleasure to be here. So I'm at the Ford Family Foundation, which is based in Roseburg, and we also have an office in Eugene. The Ford Family Foundation was endowed by Kenneth and Hallie Ford, who were the founders of Roseburg Forest Products, and they made their fortune in the timber industry in primarily Douglas, Coos County, but also Siskiyou County, California. And so we work throughout Oregon with a focus on rural Oregon and also Siskiyou County, California. The foundation, Kenneth and Hallie Ford were very philanthropic throughout the course of their whole lives, but as Kenneth Ford reached the end of his life in 1997, he decided to create the foundation and formalize it as a professional institution that was staffed with an independent board and so on. And so we've really been a foundation in our current form for about 20 years. We work our mission is successful citizens in vital rural communities, and by successful citizens we mean that not in the legalistic term, but in the civic way of people contributing to their communities and taking leadership in their communities. Most people across Oregon actually know us because of our scholarship program. At any given time, we have 1,000 people receiving scholarships and going to post-secondary education through our scholarships. We have 4 different kinds of scholarship programs. One of them is a traditional scholarship program for kids who are just leaving high school and going on to a 4-year program. But we also have some non-traditional scholarship programs. We have one called the Ford Restart Program, which is for people who are 25 and older who want to go back to school, or either they never went to college to begin with, or they went to college and the economy changed and they need to go back to retool. And we also have one called the Ford Opportunity Scholarship, which is for single parents. And then we also have a scholarship program for the sons and daughters of employees of Roseburg Forest Products. In the second way where people in Oregon tend to know us is because of the investment we've made over the course of the last 12 or 13 years in leadership development programs in partnership with Rural Development Initiatives, RDI, and also in partnership with NAO. And across rural Oregon, more than 6,000 people now have gone through that leadership development program in rural communities. In the last few years, we have moved, I think, from being a fledgling foundation that was purely responsive in the way that it made grants, and the kinds of grants that our board originally made and enjoyed making were to community centers, firehouses, community fairgrounds, libraries, and so on. And over the course of the last 20 years, the board has gotten to think more about what kinds of outcomes do we want to be able to see and support in rural communities across Oregon. And we remain responsive, and so as communities have their community priorities set and they want to come in through a responsive grant door, they can. But we've also gotten more strategic or proactive in our grant making and have defined 3 major outcome areas that we're working on. One, we call them the 3 E's: employment, education, and engagement in community and civic life. So that our grant making programs are both responsive and strategic, focusing on those 3 outcomes. I think one of the things I want to just introduce now, and we can talk about it more later, is we have a very deep connection and commitment to community-led change processes. And so with the 6,000 people, in partnership with the 6,000 people who've been through our leadership development program, we're now trying to take the next step of working with them to help communities define the priorities that they have for community vitality, hear from communities directly, and try to support whatever work they're doing in communities that might be working toward those 3 E's: education, employment, and engagement in community and civic affairs. So what we've done in the last year and a half has been driven by a community building approach to improving outcomes at the community level. And what that has meant is that we've needed to have staff who are on the ground, who can have their finger on the pulse of what's going on in the community. And so for the very first time, this year we hired what we're calling field coordinators, and those are people who are in their home community working for us. And I'm pleased to say that one of them is here. Mauricio Valerio is in the back of the room there, and so thanks to Mauricio, we can really have much more on the ground information about what's happening in Eastern Oregon. Similarly, we hired somebody who lives in the Newberg-Yamhill area and one in Siskiyou County. So this is our effort to really be much more engaged at the community level, much more in touch with what's happening in your community, so that we can be more directly supportive of whatever the community priorities are. So that's the overview, and I'll turn it over to my friend here.
Thank you, and good morning. I apologize for sounding more nasally than I normally do, but I have come down with this head cold. So anyway, I'm really glad to be here, and just first of all, like my peers here, want to thank you for the work that you do in rural Oregon. It's critical work, and we're honored to support you, and I guess I wanted to first take a poll and see how many of you here have received grants from the Meyer Trust in the past. Okay, I just want people to know we do work in rural Oregon. Sometimes we're asked that because we don't have a physical office or a presence in rural Oregon. And to set the record straight, I am 10 years older than Max, so I was actually, because I finished college on time, I was out of college. I'm not saying he didn't, I don't really know, but I was out of college by the time he was in Bend High School. And while I didn't grow up east of the mountains from Portland, I did grow up in Beaverton. At that time, it was a city of 14,000 people and still had an airstrip right next to my high school at Beaverton High School. And I've had the good fortune of coming to Central Oregon. My parents used to bring me here. I can remember vacations in the early 60s when we'd come here, and I've been a property owner and involved in the community of Sisters for the past 20 years. So I do get over here, not as much as I would like to, but looking forward to spending more time here. But I think I do have some sense and pulse on rural Oregon, although certainly not as deeply as you all. I'm pleased that you heard from Hanif this morning. I wasn't able to make it, but Hanif and I work very closely, and he's worked very closely with the Meyer Trust over the last 4 years. And that's really led to our pivot. And I think all of you are probably aware, if you follow the Meyer Trust, we've gone through significant change in the last couple of years, and it's all been embedded and surrounded around our commitment to equity. Ann mentioned their mission. Our mission is to contribute through organizations, individuals, and communities to a flourishing and equitable Oregon. And we've spent the last 4 years talking about what equitable means. And if you go, and we've gone through a deep, deep training with our trustees, with our staff, with our leadership team, and it's ongoing. This work, once you get into on an equity journey, this work continues. There's no end point to it. But it's also, I would say, both personally, professionally, and in terms of the Meyer Trust, it's the most important work that we've ever done. So if you want to learn more about equity, I would suggest, in terms of the Meyer view, I'd suggest that you go to our website, take a look at our equity statement and our equity lens, because it's the way that we look at our work going forward, both our grant making, our staffing, our trustee makeup, the way that we're investing the assets of the corpus, and I can talk about some of these things a little bit more if there's time later. But in effect, what it means for us is that we are looking to break down barriers and to create pathways to historically disenfranchised populations. And I know, and I suspect, and we'll love to take questions later, that a lot of you in rural Oregon say, because if you read our blogs, if you read our website, it talks a lot about race. That's primarily because we've done our equity work in a racial framework because of the deep disparities that occur through this country and frankly throughout Oregon, and the city of Portland in particular, as one of the whitest cities in this country. We have chosen to do our work through a racial framework, but you apply that framework across the continuum or the range of all historically marginalized or disenfranchised populations, whether it's geography, it's class, so socioeconomic, it's gender, it's LGBTQ, seniors, disabled, etc. And that's the lens that we're bringing to our work, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. We've moved, Ann also mentioned being a generally responsive foundation. So for 30 or so years, I would say the Meyer Trust operated as Mr. Meyer invented one-stop shopping. That's what Freddy's is known for, right? And we pretty much continued that. It wasn't a bad thing. If you were a nonprofit in Oregon, you met our non-discrimination clause, you could come in for a grant, and we were generally responsive. We had some initiatives, but we were generally responsive, and we pivoted from that recently, where we've now gone and we've just had our first funding call under this new format for 4 funding areas. We have what we call equitable education, we have our affordable and stable housing, we have our healthy environments, which mainly will focus on environmental justice issues, and then we have our building communities, which to most of you will probably look more like what Meyer looked like previously in terms of where we offer capacity building, we offer technical assistance, but we're also going to focus very much on civic engagement and building leaders from communities that historically have not been well represented in this state or had a voice at the table in this state. So those are the major changes that we've made, and the 4 funding areas that we have landed on, which we believe are really the foundation for equity and the need to address these areas if we're truly going to have a flourishing and equitable Oregon for all. Ann also mentioned, and I think Max did too, about civic engagement and outreach. This was not an easy process for us, and I've tried to be very transparent in my blogs about it. We reorganized a considerable amount of our staff. That doesn't happen very often in philanthropy. Our leadership team, and as I mentioned, our trustees all look different. We brought in a lot of content experts, and if you look at our program teams, almost all of them, and I think I actually didn't get a chance to, because we've grown so much now, we have almost 40 staff, and when I got there we had 11. I think almost all of the program staff, if not all, have worked in the nonprofit sector. So they have a good, deep understanding, and they've done considerable outreach in, not only did we do it in terms of focus groups, and we traveled the state and met, and probably a number of you went to some of the community meetings that we had, and we did these surveys, but you helped shape these 4 funding areas. You also helped shape and further outreach the funding call that just was issued in this last spring, this spring of 16, which we are currently finalizing and will announce the awards early November. Our trustees will look at the recommendations at the end of October, and we'll be announcing them in November. To put it in perspective, we were frankly blown away. We had 675 applications for one funding call, asking for a total of $96 million. We had 11 million, we have 11 million for this particular funding call. So our job in evaluating these is not easy, and it's significantly challenging, but we were very pleased at the effort by the nonprofits to tie their particular funding needs and requests to the equity criteria and the equity goals that we had set out. I do want to go over with you, time permitting, some of my early observations around what I'm seeing and how I think this will evolve, and then time will tell whether I'm right, but I'll stop there and Jim can let us come back to that.
Okay, yeah. So I'm going to ask a few questions of the panel, give them an opportunity to elaborate further on some of the ideas that they've already expressed. And so and then we're going to open it up to Q&A. So I want to make sure we have plenty of time for all of you to ask questions as well. But as an opportunity to sort of wrap back around to some of the issues that you wanted to recontextualize, what needs, I mean, you're all doing great work. You're all, helping nonprofits serve these communities. But we also know that there are astounding needs still not being met here in Oregon. What needs are you seeing and are maybe keeping you awake at night that are not being addressed? And how are you adapting to those? I mean, Doug, you just talked about $96 million worth of requests, but you only have $11 million. I'm assuming at least maybe 14 million of them are worthy of your money. So that means that they're, or more.
Yeah.
I'm just joking here. So any one of you, how do you see other parts of what's happening out there that you're not currently able to address, and what are you doing to adapt to those?
I'll jump in real quick and just say, I think Ann could probably say the same as I could in response to Doug's comment. The requests are always going to exceed the available amount of the resources. And in fact, as I was coming over here, one of the person who's our senior program officer for our community grant program said, be sure to tell them that sometimes a grant gets denied by the Oregon Community Foundation not because it's a bad idea or because we don't think it's worthy, simply because we've ran out of available resources. And in trying to balance this issue of being a statewide organization and making sure that we're responding to all communities and really trying to get into communities where we think the needs might be significant in one grant cycle versus another, good ideas sometimes get left unsupported. And we never want you to take that as a sense that we thought your idea was bad, and we always encourage you to reach out to us if you don't get approval in a grant and ask the question about why that is so we can share with you. And sometimes it's not a very good answer. It's just simply that we ran out in that funding cycle, we ran out of money. In the area of needs, so the mission of the Oregon Community Foundation is to improve the life of all Oregonians through the power of philanthropy. So the one job that I have that my two colleagues to the left of me don't have is we're actually trying to grow philanthropy through new donors. And so we are hopeful that as time goes on, we continue to expand the number of people in Oregon who've committed to the communities where they live, and whether through the Oregon Community Foundation or through their own private foundation or through some other method, are really trying to grow the ability to give back to community. And that's an important thing for us. That's as much a part of our mission in trying to help grow philanthropy as it is in giving those resources away, because that's where we're going to meet some of these needs that we've got coming forward. The stuff that keeps me up at night, I don't know if any of you had a chance recently. We just released about a week or two ago a fairly comprehensive report called the Latinos in Oregon Report. If you haven't read that, I'd really encourage you to get on our website and take a look at it or request a copy of it in hard copy. It does a pretty good comprehensive job of evaluating the challenges, back to this issue of the opportunity gap, really evaluating the challenges for that large growing community and recognizing that we can't be the Oregon we want to be if we're not helping particularly that community, given its size, start to actually address those issues in educational attainment, in economic opportunity, and the like. So I worry about that because I'm not sure that our systems are interconnected well enough to continue to serve this large and growing population. More than, I think, 25% or 30%, something in that range, of first graders this year are all Latinos. Maybe it's even a little higher than that. Overall population, I think a quarter of all school children in Oregon are Latinos, and yet they're half as likely to graduate. The jobs that they will get when they graduate, if they get a chance to get any kind of education, will pay about 50%. So there's serious gaps there, and I'm not sure we've aligned our state systems efficiently to address that. I would say when I go out and talk in communities, whether I'm talking to people in Bend or in Tillamook or in Pendleton or in Portland, access to affordable housing is probably the number one issue people want to talk to me about. They want to talk to me about what we can do. And I have to tell you, with a little bit of resources, even the three of us who work very closely together in a lot of funding strategies, we don't have enough money ourselves to build Oregon out of its affordable housing problem. And so that's a real challenge, I think. And I think we've got to get a lot more creative than we have been to date on that issue, and we're obviously interested in exploring that. And then the final one I'll say, and this is a new area over the last 5 years for OCF to spend some time in, is really thinking about economic vitality, particularly in small and rural communities. And I know, again, the three of us have worked in concert around this issue, and we're continuing to do that, but finding ways to take communities who have, for the last 40-plus years, been really struggling as a result of the changing nature of Oregon's economy, to try to find ways to engage those communities that build some economic vitality. And we've got a variety of strategies we're using, and I won't go into the details here, but they're also fairly, they're new to us. And so we're testing that model to see what we can do to figure out how to help communities become more financially independent. Okay.
Well, I would agree with the issues that Max brought up. I think that we see the issues in rural areas of the Latino population is really important, and we as a foundation have not traditionally had a program that's targeted Latino population, and we are starting to do that now. Similarly, even though we're a foundation that works in rural areas, we have not traditionally worked on the Native American, with the Native American population of rural Oregon, and we're trying to figure out how we can do that better now. I want to ditto the thing about the point that Max made about housing. Homelessness is just such a problem in rural communities. All up and down the I-5 corridor, we get calls from Ashland, we see it in Roseburg, we see it in Coos Bay, we see it everywhere. It's not just a Portland and Eugene problem. And it is not an area that we work in, and we have to figure out how we're gonna address the problem if it's not gonna be a priority area for us to work in. I want to say another area that comes up a lot for us is what the social science and the social policy people are calling now the opportunity youth, which is a euphemism for those folks between the ages of 16 and 24 who are neither in school nor working or employed in the labor force. And this is something that we see a lot in rural Oregon. And there's just not a lot of good evidence about what works for those folks. And there are people who we have to figure out how to get our arms around supporting those folks to get them back into the workforce. And then the last thing that I think is new for us that we're trying to figure our way through is behavioral and mental health issues, particularly for youth, to make sure that they can succeed in school. And we're trying to figure out how to help the educational system feel like they have some supports for students that have behavioral and mental health problems. Now that we don't have counselors in schools, we don't have a lot of the kinds of curricular supports for those kids, and we're really grappling with that right now too.
Thank you, Ann. Doug?
Yeah, if I can remember the question at this point. No, I can remember it. I'd agree.
Where did you stand on Iraq?
Yeah, I'd agree with Max that we're not going to build our way out of housing, but I'd expand that to say we're not going to build our way out of any of these problems. I mean, that's despite all of your good efforts, and you guys, you do great work with the people that you're able to reach and able to serve. We like to think that we're spending our money smartly, but this state, first of all, I refer to it as being philanthropically poor. We don't have a lot of organized philanthropy, and I applaud OCF and the job they've done in terms of building their corpus to helping expand philanthropy across the state. That's probably not going to change dramatically in the near future. We do have some very high net worth people in this state that could help, but compared to other parts of the country, philanthropy is still going to be a small amount of the resources that's going to be dedicated towards solving these problems. So then I turn to, well, how can we redirect resources, the majority of them that are going to come from various government sources, to address these problems effectively. So what we're going to be looking for more going forward are what sort of collaborations and networks are our nonprofit partners involved in that can really help leverage or help ratchet up their impact. What sort of systems change or policy change are you and we looking for to take, historically philanthropy used to be oriented more towards research and testing of new programs that then would be incorporated into a lot of the programs funded by the government, and they'd be the idea generator. We, I think, should return to some of that. And not in terms of Meyer, I think one of the changes that you'll see, while program expansion is important, particularly where it shows that it's working, we're going to be more interested in the systems, policy change, and advocacy work, both in terms of what our partners can do and what we can do. So we'll be taking a much more aggressive advocacy position on issues than you've seen the Meyer Trust in the past. Knowing who is in your service region, I think I'd challenge all of us, because I've learned so much in the last few years about who just is both within Oregon and within the Portland metro area through the equity work that we've been doing. And I was not aware the 5 most diverse counties in this state are rural counties. It's not Portland metro area, which I think a lot of folks think that's the case. So who are we? Who are we trying to reach? Who's in our service area, and are they represented both at our organizations or people that have voices in helping develop those programs? Because the people that need those services usually have pretty good ideas on which strategies will work and which won't for them. And the last one that I think about a lot is the bridging of the rural and urban divide in this state, and doing it in ways, and can't release names right now because these are a couple pending grants proposals that are being considered for October. But we were really pleased to see where some of the urban service agencies were pairing up with rural service agencies to share their learned expertise. And one in particular was around immigrants, and immigrants who are legal immigrants but may not have the proper documentation, and what an urban group had learned that they're now sharing with rural groups to help those immigrants get the legal documentation so they can comfortably enroll in schools and get jobs and be more contributing more to the bottom line. So those are some of the things I think about.
That's great, Doug, and I really appreciate your moving more into helping to advocate for leveraging government money better, and the ways that nonprofits can be a part of that. We spoke this morning about a report recently released by Independent Sector called United for Charities that had some pretty startling polling data among voters in America, across America, that showed that 74% of American voters believe that giving $1,000 to a charity is more effective than giving it to the government. And so when you also talk about growing philanthropy, Max, I think that's hugely important. Same study, 88% of American voters believe that the government should make it easier to take charitable deductions. Those are some startling numbers when you look at, the whole. So I want to make sure that we have time. I could keep going and asking questions here, but I want to make sure we have time to get some questions here from the audience. So do we have any first volunteer? Oh, there we go, over there in the corner. And could you state your name, the organization you work for?
So I'm Tim Rusk with Mountain Star Family Relief Nursery, so one of the early child abuse prevention programs around the state. And I just have to start by saying thanks for contributing to Mountain Star and just all of the incredible work that you support just throughout the state. It's really incredible. Your foundations provide the fuel to our engine as a nonprofit, so we go out and we do our work, and it's because of the grants that we receive. And then my question is a little bit different, which is one of the slides Jim showed earlier was around the capacity of nonprofits and the health of nonprofit organizations. We have a new strategic plan. We identified we want to create a 3-month reserve account, which is a great aspiration, and we hope to make it from 1.2 months to 1.4 months. But our organization grows, and of course, foundation grants, we have to fully expend those. We got government funding, we have to fully expense that. So the part of our budget to contribute to our operating reserves is really small. And the more we grow, the more reserve we need. So would any of your foundations consider a grant to support our operating reserve? Or just what are your thoughts around that issue?
And to put that in context, so the data shows that 47% of Oregon nonprofits have less than 3 months of operating reserve.
Yeah.
Any of you? And you don't have to say that you're going to give money to them, just generally.
First of all, yeah,
will you,
that's a little
right.
bit of a setup. So now when you file a grant and you don't get funded, you're going to say, but Doug, you said when we were at...
and
no.
it's on tape, too.
But I do think, first of all, we recognize the importance of operating reserves, and we support building operating reserves through general operating grants. We've been doing general operations funding for a number of years, and really have not required nonprofits to come up with ideas or programs that they think will fit our interests, as opposed to, we want to look deeply at what's the work you're doing. Again, I'm going to go back to the equity aspect and ask if where you are in terms of your organization, in terms of the equity commitment, who you're serving, who's represented on your staff or your board, how culturally competent or intelligent is the organization. You meet that test, then we don't have a problem with general operating grants that might help build your reserves.
Sure.
Max?
Do you not want to go?
Well, I can, mine will be shorter and not as happy.
Yeah, well, and I'm not sure mine's going to be all that happy either. So just like Meyer, and this may come as a surprise to some of you, because through our community grant program, we typically, most of you would know that we typically aren't an operations funder. We're more project-based through our community grant program. But about $30 million a year from OCF goes to support operating support, and that typically is coming directly from our donors through their donor advised funds to the organizations that those donors are connected with and choose to support. And the vast majority of that money moves as direct operating support without any kind of restriction. And so I think the real answer is that for OCF, we're probably never going to be a likely candidate to use our very limited discretionary resources, which we really are trying to get to leverage, to support a operating reserve effort at a specific nonprofit. We might be willing, and often do capacity building sort of grant making, but not just to move it from sort of our bank account into your bank account is not a likely strategy that's going to work with us. But my message would simply be that the importance of operating reserves is something obviously your boards appreciate and understand. And it ought to be an important function of what you're doing in your direct fundraising appeals as you're working with your individual donors, some of whom are probably donors of ours and who can use their donor resources if they're sufficiently persuaded about why that is such an important thing for your organization. And like Mountain Star, we understand what you do. And if you weren't able to do that, there would be kids who would not be, and families that wouldn't be getting the benefit of that relief nursery. So recognizing that downturns happen and that things can happen, and having a glide path with funding while you struggle to address those needs is a really important thing. And it seems to me that would be a compelling message for donors as well, as you had that conversation with them. So that's probably as good as I can do.
First of all, Tim, thank you for your great work. It's really wonderful to meet you across the room. This is such an important issue. The core capacities and the core functions of nonprofits are so vital to the work that you do. And I think that and I hear very, very loudly the concern that either public sector funders and private sector funders don't provide the kind of support that allow for organizations to be stable, to plan, to grow, to evaluate, to hire human resources people or evaluators or whatever there is. So our foundation has not traditionally provided this kind of funding. And one of the things that I think that maybe Max and Doug might agree with me on this is one of our roles is to try and help our board understand the dynamics of the sector with which we collaborate so much, and to understand that these needs are real and that we need to figure out how to be helpful. If there's an organization that is key to the field and to providing core services that align with our mission, it is in our interest to make sure that that is a very healthy organization over time. Now, I know that, and our staff know that. We try to have this conversation with our board, and we try to keep our board attuned to this. But they don't live in this nonprofit world every day, and so I have to say that we're only beginning to have this kind of discussion in a way where they can hear it. So I hope that over time, our answer to that question will be yes, but it's not right now.
Great. Thank you.
I'm going to add to that while they find the next question in the room. So, Tim, the other thing I think, first of all, and this relates to any sort of request that you think is maybe not very straightforward, I would hope that you would call our program officer. In that case, it would fall under the building communities area, and they should be able to discuss through with you what your request is going to be and the nature of it and how they think that fits within our funding parameters. They can't guarantee you the outcome, obviously, but so to Max's point, if it came in as we're only looking for operating reserve, I don't think that would be as compelling as it's a general operating, which will help us do these things, including building an operating reserve, or it's capacity building for fundraising. So some of it, again, though, I would just encourage folks to be talking to our program teams, and if you don't get through to them, I need to know about that. Thank you.
Next question. Do we have another question? Yep, Bob.
Hi, Bob Lieberman from Kairos based in Grants Pass, but we're in 15 locations in 5 counties now. And thank all of you for your foundation support of various projects we've had over the years, both innovation and some capital projects. I want to make mention of a body of science that you probably are aware of, which is cross-cutting to some of the issues you were talking about. And that science is based on what we know about average childhood experiences and what we know about the neuroscience in terms of what happens to all of us when we're under stress. And so we do know that stress impedes brain development for kids. And what we're experiencing in the Rogue Valley is the CCOs have come together, actually the healthcare community has come together realizing that if we could change the social determinants of health, then long-term health would be better, because we know that average childhood experiences are the leading determinant of negative physical health outcomes, social outcome, and early death in our country. And that's from the Centers for Disease Control. So there's a self-healing community initiative that's been started in the Rogue Valley. It's Josephine Jackson Curry County. And what's happening as we teach the progressive impact of adversity, we teach about what it does in our brains. And it's a body of science that's called NEAR, Neuroscience, Epigenetics, Adverse Childhood Experiences, and Resilience. Because while we know the brain gets damaged by stress, especially in early childhood, we also know the brain is resilient and changes with experience. So this body of science is creating a common language in the Rogue Valley, which is really bringing together the kind of community collaboration and the kind of coming together that Doug was talking about. So it's kind of amazing to see what's happening so far. We'll see how it plays out. The Robert Wood Johnson Foundation just covered the Self-Healing Community Initiative. They issued a monograph about it. And in communities where this initiative has been in place for the last 8 or 10 years, the leading indicators of what we're worried about, cross-cutting, are coming down. So adolescent suicide is dropping, substance abuse is dropping, Walla Walla, Washington, Longview, Washington, other places like that. So it's not really a question. It's
Okay.
just a comment, but maybe a response about, and it does affect schools. So it's trauma-informed practice is now being introduced in schools as a project happening in Grants Pass with a model out of Washington State University. And so maybe the question is, how much on the screen is this for your boards, for your foundations?
Yeah. Well, first of all, Bob, thank you for your great work. It's just amazing what you all have done in Kairos. We are, as a staff, very aware of the ACEs work and the NEAR work, and also aware of the excellent work that's being done in Jackson-Josephine counties and in Grants Pass and in the Grants Pass School District and Talent in Phoenix. It's really remarkable. It's great. And we are trying to expand that conversation ourselves in Douglas County, which is our home county, so that people in Douglas County use this ACEs view, this adverse childhood experiences perspective, as exactly the knitting kind of framework that allows people to work together. And I think we're finding it very powerful, just as the work that we're starting to do in Douglas County now, and appreciate the leadership that you all have taken in Southern Oregon on this issue.
Max, you wanted to?
Yeah, I'll just jump in and say that similarly, we've been using, as part of the Children's Opportunity Gap frame, we recognize that the ACEs work has been an important driver for sort of how we've structured our thinking as well. And you may or may not know that the three of us, along with the Collins Foundation, are part of an organization that we sort of collectively have formed called the Oregon Parenting Education Collaborative, unfortunately named OPEC. And this collaborative has been in existence now for about 7 years, and now there are parenting education hubs in 29 of the 36 counties that are serviced by a parenting education hub, and we're continuing to invest in this space specifically for the sort of rationale that you've laid out. And the brain science that we're learning through both that work and the general work that's going on in the field continues to tell us that early investments in parenting and children and early childhood education, birth to 3, is a real important place for us to be with our discretionary resources. And it's a significant place where OCF is investing those resources, and in partnership with my 2 colleagues here.
Great, great. I think we have time for one more question here. Do we have a hand up? Okay, hand up over there. Up.
Amy's getting her exercise today.
Yes, she is. Yeah.
Hi, Barb Gibbs, Senior Consultant with NAO. And thinking about all of you and your very large corpuses up there, and thinking about places where philanthropic dollars are going that are very hard to reach, and those are into the for-profit philanthropic funds like Fidelity and Schwab. Have you guys talked about that at all, and how you might leverage or work together to loosen up that money and get it flowing out into the nonprofit sector?
Max, I can't imagine you don't have a comment on this.
Yeah, well, sure. It's interesting. We're, the role that we play as a community foundation and having people establish individual funds at OCF, it's a really interesting conversations. And we have staff, philanthropic advisors across the state who work with individuals and talk about what their planning is and what they might want to do. People who are interested in really purely transactional philanthropy. In other words, I'm putting the money in for a specific purpose, and I know the 2 or 3 charities I'm going to give it to, and that's how it's going to happen. Those vehicles probably work relatively well. We try to view all philanthropy as good philanthropy, right? I mean, we're happy anytime somebody is putting money into a charitable cause. Whether or not it does or doesn't flow through OCF is sort of less important. But when I do sit down with a donor or a prospective donor who is considering the possibility of a Schwab or a Fidelity charitable fund, I just talk about what they want to really ultimately do with their philanthropy and what their theory is. And often I can pose the question and say, if your interest is in really figuring out nonprofits that are doing an excellent job combating child sex trafficking, I want you to call your Fidelity advisor and ask him which ones to go to. Because the reality is they're not going to know that, right? I mean, they don't know that. The value that we have in working with all of you is that we get to understand what your organizations are actually doing and how they're impacting the community. And that's the sort of secret sauce, the added value that OCF can provide directly to donors if they want to be active in their philanthropy and part of essentially a statewide learning collaborative about what's going on in Oregon and what nonprofits are actually doing to combat those challenges. I think we're lucky as compared to other states in the country. Those funds aren't doing nearly as much or tying up as many dollars as they might be in other places. But we sure are keeping an eye on it. And, we reached across the aisle and had conversations with folks at Fidelity and hope at some point that they would see us as a resource. So when they've got donors who don't know what to do or don't know the nonprofits to go to, we hope they'd come talk to us because we would want to send them your way.
I don't think I have anything to add to that, except it's impossible almost for an organization like Meyer to try to unlock those assets. And we actually did some research before Max came to OCF and found that Meyer could accept contributions from someone other than Mr. Meyer. So if there were some groups out there that we could take them, we had 2 interested donors and decided that also would work counter to OCF so that we wouldn't pursue that. But I share your concern, Barbara, because those dollars, when they get there, I don't think they have, like Max said, the resources and the information as to where they really could, if we're all about leverage and impact, they're probably not getting that advice that they could if they were coordinating through OCF or even checking in with some of the private foundations. But I don't see that happening.
Well, I want to give any of you, just a final word, a final comment that you want to leave the folks here gathered at the High Desert Conference? If you have any parting ideas that you didn't get a chance to put out before.
You go first.
Or you can tell us when you're going to release the emails.
When we're releasing the emails, that's right.
Your tax return.
Well, Donald.
As soon as you release your tax return.
Yeah, that's right. As soon as you release your tax returns, that's it. I just want to say that I'm a newcomer to Oregon, and I have traveled across this state probably more than most Oregonians, actually, in the last 3.5 years. And it is amazing the work that you all do. And sometimes I come to conferences like this, and people thank us for for the support that we give. But it's really not us. It's you all who are doing the work. And it's such an honor and a privilege to be a partner and to be able to be a collaborator with you, because you are the ones who are doing the really hard work. And I just applaud everything that all of you in this room are doing. And it's just mind-boggling. We had our board here for a retreat a couple of weeks ago, and Shelley Smith gave us a tour around the Kids Center in Bend, and it was just amazing the work that the child advocacy centers are doing. It's amazing the work that all of the rest of you are doing, and for us, it's a privilege to work with you. So go off and do more great stuff.
Doug or Max?
We'll give Doug the last word, since he's the dean of the philanthropist group on the podium. One of the things that Jim had asked us to think about was an innovation or an issue that we saw sort of coming, and so I guess I'll close with the thoughts that I put into that before I got here. I really do believe that this is a time when we have to start reimagining structures, and we see that a little bit in Oregon already with early learning hubs, with the parenting hubs, with the CCOs. But I think we're going to see it more in the area of education over the next 10 years. I think really sky's the limit in how we want to reimagine the structures of how we deliver service, and also how we work together, the networks that we can build. And about a year ago, I was at a conference, and I listened to a professor from UC Davis talk about the idea of networks. And he told the story, and I'm sure many of you have heard this, about the discovery of penicillin, right? And we all think it was sort of in Dr. Fleming's lab in 1928, and he tipped the thing over, and all of a sudden the bacteria from the moldy cheese or bread went the other direction. And the reality is that's the sort of the story we all were taught in high school about the discovery. But the Romans knew that if you took moldy bread and you rubbed it on horses' saddle sores, the saddle sores improved. I mean, science knew a lot about penicillin and a lot about the effects on penicillin and infection way before Dr. Fleming's discovery in 1928. And from 1928 until World War II, almost nothing was done. Despite the articles that had been written, nothing was done to bring penicillin to market. Ultimately, during the war and shortly after the war, penicillin got sort of commercialized and industrialized. And what made it happen was this incredible network that was put together by a handful of people that actually brought penicillin, this miracle drug that's just saved millions and millions of people's lives that people knew about, but there wasn't a network essentially built to actually bring it forward. And the point of the whole thing was, and it's something I've thought a lot about in the last year, is the innovation wasn't penicillin. It wasn't the drug. The innovation was the network. And more I'm convinced that we know early childhood data, we know ACEs data, we know what works. The innovation is going to be the network in which we deliver what we know. And that's what I think we've got to spend time collectively reimagining if we really want to have the impact we want to have. So there's my closing thought.
Thank you. Doug, you get the final word.
Yeah, thanks, Max, for calling me out as the oldest guy in the room, and that's okay. I'd just say ditto to both Ann and Max's comments, and don't have a lot more to add. I think this network and collaboration area is a really interesting one to explore, and I know it's really difficult when you have your head down and every day you have more to do than you can possibly do. But one area where we've seen it, and we've seen it together, we have our own collaborations and we have nonprofits that we're collaborating with, and we have seen the power of those new ideas, the ways to bring forward and to actually really crank up the systems change ideas. And one of the ones that we've focused on and had, I think, great success, and we've been funding it and encouraging it, the folks on the ground are really doing the work, but is in the Housing Alliance, the Oregon Housing Alliance. And we've seen them, in working with them over the past 5 to 7 years, bring together a coalition of over 50 housing providers from across the state. The networking and the regular convening that they have, the cohorts that they've formed have been very powerful to deliver best practices throughout their own work. And from an advocacy and systems orientation, they, this last legislature, have had by far the most successful funding call that they've ever received in recent history. So I do believe strongly in those networks and collaborations, and those are things that the Meyer Trust, at least, is going to look to continue to fund in addition to or beyond individual organizations' service work. So again, thanks for your work. It's a pleasure to be here with you all today, and I guess the dean will just close this out. I never thought I'd be old enough to. So just a quick side story.
Uh-oh.
So Max, the reason he has fun with me, and that's okay, is I think it was his 3rd week or 4th week on the job, and he was 48 years old, which was the same age I was when I started at the Meyer Trust, and we were asked to share the stage at an event with a number of nonprofit leaders in Portland, and it was really fun to sort of compare where we both were at that stage. And now here we are 5 years later. He is 5 years older, as am I, and I very quickly and sort of unexpectedly became the dean of the leaders, which really means just the oldest and the one in place the longest of the larger foundations. And that happened so quickly, and I think about all the great work that's been done. I mean, during that time, over $400 million has been distributed throughout Oregon by the Meyer Trust. And so proud of our staff and so our trustees, but really proud of, again, the ability to support your work. It comes with great opportunity and great responsibility. So they can kid me about being the dean for a little while longer.
Well, join me in thanking Ann, Doug, and Max. Thank you so much for your time today. Really appreciate it. And you're welcome. I know you've got to rush off to, you're having your statewide gathering. I know you've got a CAT summit coming up. I know you need to recover, and I think you're going to his thing. So we really appreciate, but if you have a few minutes to just talk and mingle, great. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Oh, no, I was thinking the same thing about the two of you.
What's that?
I hate serving on panels with the two of you because you're both so articulate.
Max has always got the story.
Oh, well.
It wasn't the hydrant.
No, it wasn't the Hydra. It wasn't the Hydra. Hey, Bob, how are you? Nice to see you.
What we were talking about, we're learning in the Rogue Valley is to blow the water line.
Yep.
That's the phrase.
Yep.
Based on the mental models. It's from the Self-Healing Community Initiative.
Sure.
Change the structures.
Yep.
And some people know, some leaders,
Oh,
these people know well.
very hard.
They're losing a little bit of sense of power.
Yep,
and
yep.
they're
It's
trying to get
very
out of
hard.
power. It's very
I think the structural challenges are often the biggest barrier. I mean, we do know what works, right? I mean, we know what these issues are. We don't know quite how to navigate these, structures, educational structures and healthcare structures and service delivery models that we've gotten very used to that I think have to change if we're going to actually leverage the money, because the money is not big enough to use the existing structures to try to deliver service. So something's got to give.
That's right. I'd love to share with you what's happening.
Yeah, I'd love to hear it. Next time I'm in Medford, just call Amy Cuddy and get on the calendar. We'll get together. Oh, that's great. Terrific. Okay, that'd be great. Too bad. We'll find out. All right, good to see you.
Yeah. Yeah, that's good. Well, yeah, but she's new officially as your